Do you believe in God, or do you believe in gods? Do you have a code of conduct that rules your life? Has this code been passed down for generations? Is this code shared by millions of others? What happens when you die? Do you go to heaven, to hell, to another body, to dirt? And where do we come from? Yes, I know, our moms. But where did the first humans come from? Man has asked these questions since the dawn of our existence. It's wired into our DNA. We're a curious bunch. Sometimes the answers to our questions might seem absurd to outsiders, but to us, they feel only natural. We might believe that gods live in the clouds or on mountaintops or in the trees. We might believe that when we die we go down a river or to a fiery hell or into the body of a cockroach. We might believe we came from a kernel of corn or a couple of naked people living in a garden or from stones hidden in a god's stomach. But the one thing man has proven over our past is that we have a remarkable capacity to believe, to have faith in the unexplainable. And this is what makes life more interesting to us than it probably is for a sea cucumber. Yes, sometimes our faith is shattered, but we keep going back for more. Our capacity to have faith separates us from the other species roaming the planet, eating, expelling waste, and reproducing. So over the millenniums, what have humans believed? In the beginning, no, not that in the beginning, for the first few 100,000 years of our existence, man believed gods or spirits lived in nature. Usually when people think of nature gods, their minds drift to Disney's Pocahontas, but I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. But this type of faith goes back way before Pocahontas and her Native American contemporaries, back to a time when we all hunted and gathered. These first Homo sapiens believed in a rudimentary form of animism, where shamans delivered rambling chants, foresaw the future, and even prayed to the spirits of the clouds or the sun or the plants to help make the survival process just a little bit easier. We know these first animists believed in an afterlife because we've seen their bones buried next to amulets, jewelry, and weapons, all demonstrating that the people in this world thought their stuff might be needed in the next. The next evolution of religions took place after the Neolithic Revolution, when we started settling down next to rivers. As the first civilizations sprouted, priests took on positions of authority, and in some cases they became absolute rulers. In other cases they ruled side by side with the tyrant, dictator, or monarch. These priests were needed because not only did they know how to predict the cycle of weather, maybe a better word for them would have been meteorologists, but because they also were thought to have a direct connection to the pantheon of gods that decided the fate of man. In Mesopotamia, the gods were Baal, Dagon, Apsu, Tiamat, and Marduk. Egypt had Ra, Anubis, Isis, Osiris, and Horus. Greece had Zeus, Poseidon, Aphrodite, Athena, and Apollo. India had Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, Indra, and Rudra. Regardless of which early civilization we're talking about, their pantheons shared some similarities. First, a few of the gods were involved in the creation process. Second, some were in charge of a positive afterlife and others were in charge of the HE double hockey sticks version. Third, some gods focused on nature, specifically what it took to ensure bountiful crops. Fourth, some cared about our daily lives, when we got married, when we had kids, and when we went to war. Fifth, most of these gods had human characteristics, although some might be animals and some might even be half animal, half man. These hybrids made it easier for us to transition from a world where we once worshipped gods of nature to a world where we increasingly needed to believe that an omnipresent human form cared about our human reality. The next phase of religious evolution occurred when people shifted from believing in many gods, or polytheism, to believing in just one, monotheism. Sometimes this transformation lasted only a generation. Other times it became a permanent fixture of humanity. These monotheistic faiths sprung up throughout the Levant, the area we today call the Middle East. The Persian Empire had Zoroastrianism, where the god Ahura Mazda promised a joyous afterlife if you were kind to your neighbors. In Egypt, Akhenaten, King Tut's father and a rather delusional pharaoh, forced his people to believe in the one true god Aten, a god who was not so coincidentally an incarnation of himself, Akhenaten. But however much Akhenaten tried to establish his universal monotheism in Egypt, once he died, his people quickly reverted back to their polytheistic traditions. Yet one monotheistic religion survived, and today it has spawned the two leading faiths in the world, Christianity and Islam. This was the faith of the Hebrews, a group of nomadic shepherds who believed in one God, Yahweh, who would later become known as simply God. God constantly put these Hebrews through tests of faith, forever challenging their allegiance to Him. He promised that they alone were the chosen ones, who, because of their struggles, would one day inherit the kingdom of heaven. The early creation stories of the Hebrews in many ways parallel the pagan stories told across Mesopotamia, most specifically in the Epic of Gilgamesh. One reality true of all faiths is that to survive they must borrow from or adopt the traditions of the region. Inventing a wholly different belief system guarantees the death of your faith. Instead, in a practice known as syncretism, new faiths blend with old faiths. For example, the Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a great flood that wipes out humanity, of a mysterious plant of knowledge, and of a sexy temptress who brings down a clan's greatest warrior. The Hebrew Torah has Noah's flood, the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, and the fateful romance of Samson and Delilah. These connections could be mere coincidence, or they could represent a history and a value system shared by many peoples in the region. Another story in the Hebrew Torah was the life of Abraham. This story is not significant because of its parallels to other regional tales, but because it is critical to understanding how the eventual Christian and Islamic faiths would one day take divergent, oftentimes antagonistic paths. According to the Old Testament, God promised Abraham and his wife Sarah that one day he would bless them with a family. They waited and waited and waited. As they aged into their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s without a baby in the belly to be found, for some odd reason, their faith in God's promise was growing thin, to the point that one day Sarah proposed to Abraham that he impregnate their servant girl, Hagar, to ensure the continuation of his bloodline. This offspring, Ishmael, soon had a new baby brother when Sarah miraculously, at the age of 90, also gave birth to a child. This one was named Isaac. As the two boys grew, God wanted to test Abraham's faith, so he challenged Abraham to sacrifice his favorite son. At the moment Abraham was to slay his chosen son, God sent down an angel to stop the murder. Abraham had proved his allegiance to God above even his love of his family. The key question was, who was Abraham's favored son? Christians believe it was Isaac, Muslims believe it was Ishmael. This is important because the line of Isaac continues on to Jesus Christ. The line of Ishmael continues on to Muhammad. Depending on which version you believe, you could have a strong argument that Abraham's ipso facto God's favored son and favored religion is either Christianity or Islam. Though many current followers might not know this story, in the early years of both faiths, it became a crucial point to support the superiority of their interpretation. Back to Abraham and his family drama. Ishmael and Hagar were eventually thrown out of the house, and Isaac went on to lead the Hebrews out of Mesopotamia. Eventually, these nomadic shepherds were taken into captivity by the Egyptians, a state in which they remained until Moses brought them out of enslavement and took them to the promised land, Israel. One of the more difficult stories for non-believers to accept is that Moses parted the Red Sea to escape the pursuit of the Egyptian pharaoh. Some historians have argued that he actually crossed a little shallower strip of water called the Reed Sea. Either way, Moses and his Hebrew followers made it out of Egypt one step closer to the Promised Land. After walking for 40 years through the deserts of the Levant, his people made it to their new home. Moses did not survive to see them arrive, but he did bring down the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai, and these tablets outlined God's laws for his Jewish followers. Many of these laws were already common in the region, as seen in the Code of Hammurabi, such as "Thou shalt not steal," "Thou shalt not kill," and "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife." Others mandated that "Thou shalt worship no other god," or "Thou shalt worship no idol," a clear attempt to prevent the followers from reverting back to their polytheistic habits. The Hebrews embraced these laws as their ethical code, and although their story and their numbers remained relatively low over the centuries, their struggle and their beliefs became a crucial part of the holy books of both Christianity and Islam, which are practiced today by over 55% of the world's population. The world's third most practiced religion, Hinduism, also started around 1000 BC, but instead of in the Levant, this religion's roots were in the subcontinent of India. When the Aryans came down across the Indus River and shared their animistic beliefs with the native Dravidians, the resulting religion became known as Hinduism. The name Hinduism in itself is a misnomer, for in actuality the religious beliefs of India were and are as divergent as the peoples in the region. There is no one Hinduism. The thousands of gods and thousands of methods of worship have some common themes, but unlike the firm orthodoxy of the Hebrew faith, the Hindu faith has proven itself quite open to interpretation. This grouping of faiths received the name Hinduism from Alexander the Great when he first recognized all these Indus region beliefs as those of the Indus region, or Hinduism. His relatively naive understanding of the beliefs of the Indians has continued for some until this day. Some still have trouble defining what is Hinduism. Some say Hindus believe in thousands of gods, others say there's only one, or a few, and that all of the others are merely manifestations, avatars of the original God. In this version, when interacting with humans, the gods Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma present themselves in a variety of forms, yet each sprouts from the single original deity. Unlike with Hebrews who can go to the Torah, or with Christians who can look to the Bible, or with Muslims who can turn to the Quran, there is no one piece of Hindu text that will give you all the key laws of the faith. However, some pieces of literature do stand out and have found their way into the belief systems of most Hindus. The Bhagavad Gita tells the story of Lord Arjuna, who is engaged in a violent battle with his family for the throne of his kingdom. He doesn't want to kill his family, but he does feel the need to take the throne for himself. He asks for guidance from the gods. Lord Vishnu descends to earth in the form of a charioteer and spends his remaining days guiding Arjuna. Their conversation provides a code for Indians to follow. Krishna warns that you should not be attached to the fruits of activities, but act as a matter of duty. In other words, the material world is irrelevant. We are all born for a purpose, and we must all fulfill this karma, this duty, no matter if your duty is to bury dead bodies, wash the streets, or defeat your family in battle. The Bhagavad Gita also provides clues on how to obtain a higher understanding of your calling. We should practice meditation known as yoga. In a different story, the Ramayana, Princess Sita is kidnapped, and her husband, an incarnation of the god Vishnu, spends his life trying to free her from her captors. This epic poem speaks of the importance of fidelity and family above all else. And the Upanishads speak to a host of beliefs and behaviors, one of which outlines the Hindu perspective on the afterlife. It states, "According as one acts, according as one behaves, so does he become. The doer of good becomes good. The doer of evil becomes evil. One becomes virtuous by virtuous action, bad by bad action. According to his deeds, the embodied self assumes successively various forms in various conditions." This is the belief in reincarnation. Unlike the previously mentioned faiths that promise an afterlife not of this world, Hinduism states that your soul will be reincarnated into a different body. Depending on how naughty or nice you were in your previous life, you could end up improving your position in your caste. This process could take centuries, but at some point, if successive incarnations of your soul conduct good deeds, you can break the cycle of transmigration from body to body and reach a state of ultimate liberation where you will know what is truly real moksha and no longer live in a world where everything is an illusion, Maya. You will have escaped the misery of humanity. By 500 BC, the roots of the major faiths of the world were firmly in place. Within a few centuries, two new challengers, in two totally different parts of the planet, would attempt to reform Hinduism and Judaism. One would be a prince, the other a carpenter. But that is for another